And I want to talk today about, let's say, a movement, a transition, which we can see in our field. This is probably also important for other fields, but in our field, we feel it extremely that we have the movement, a movement which is caused by the fact that we are now, since more or less 30 years, working with personal computers and have a kind of virtual communication since more than 25 years. So what we can observe is a kind of desire for the tangible, for the tactile, for the physical. And what we can observe is a kind of renaissance of the physical space and also of the tangible object. So to illustrate that movement from the... Can I have my pictures? Okay. To illustrate that movement from the immaterial to the physical, from the virtual to the tangible, from the cloud back to the earth, I have selected some projects from my studio, art+com. And as you have just heard, we are 28 years old. We are media artists, designers, but also technicians, programmers, and hackers. And since the late 80s, we are working in this interdisciplinary tension between art, design, and digital technologies. So we are called art+com. And in the first, let's say, 15 years from the late 80s up to the mid of the last decade, we mainly worked, as you can expect from media designers, we worked with monitors, we worked with projections, and we also worked with big screens. So we did a lot of interactive screen-based work, a lot of projection-based work, and a lot of reactive and interactive screen-based work, large-scale installations, and so on. And as I said 10 years ago, we then tried to bring the qualities of the digital into the physical world. So we started then working with computationally designed, physical, mechatronic-based, and kinetic objects. And this will be the main part of my talk. But before going into the physical world, I want to show at least one project from the old area, from the virtual area. And this is a stage design which we did 15 years ago. We had been invited to make a virtual stage design for an opera. And the opera is based on the libretto, The Jew of Malta from Christopher Marlowe. And in this opera, there's one person who has power over all the other ones. And we gave him the power, metaphorically, by giving him the possibility to interact with the stage. So what you see here, so what you can see here, he can open up, the guy on the right side, he can open up the stage with his arms, interactively, and if he was happy, he stopped doing that, and it was always generated newly, so he could decide in which kind of environment the whole play should take place. So we gave him different kind of interaction principles. So, and as said, we used the idea of interactivity as a metaphor for power. So I said different kind of interaction principles, so he could really move the stage and the actors in the stage. So this had been 15 years ago, and at that time there was no tracking system available with which we could track his movements. So we had to program everything from scratch. So for instance here, and sorry for a little bit tech talk, we detected the outline of the actor, the center of gravities, and so we could even detect the movements and the gestures of the main character. So and this was the situation. I was in the orchestra, and here we had the camera tracking the person and translating these movements onto the stage. So if you start early doing things, you have to be very risky. So it was a very risky situation doing this because no one did it before, and we learned a lot about that. The second thing we did for this stage was a virtual costume design. So we developed a technology which allows us to project very precisely onto the singers. And we use it to dramatize the story. So for instance, the red lady here, she has a fight with the green ones. And as soon as they agree, they get the same colors or the same textures. And as you probably can see, it only projects onto the body. So it's not going onto the rear of the stage. So therefore, we had to develop also, again, a new system which allows us to do that. So we used an infrared camera, and with this, we took 25 pictures per second. They are high contrasty. We made masks out of them, added texture to it, and then projected that picture from the camera position onto the singers. So they had been very precisely, they could move around and had always this kind of virtual costumes on. But at the end, we used 4 cameras. It was much more complicated, as just explained. So, but you can see that it only hits the actor, and he was freely to move around and had always these virtual costumes carrying around. So this was an example from the times where we worked mainly with this kind of projection, these immaterial output interfaces. And as said, 10 years ago, we then started to go and translate all this quality of the digital into the physical world. And there was one project which led us this way. This was an art commission in Tokyo in 2006. And we had been commissioned to do a work on a public sidewalk coming from the subway, and luckily there was an artificial pond directly at this public sidewalk. So it was all about, at that time, having a dialogue between the immaterial, the virtual, and the physical. So we said, okay, let's do something where we have a dialogue between light waves and water waves, between the immaterial world and the physical world. And so we created a 4x4 meter LED floor where people can walk over and create virtual ripples. And if they hit the waterfront, as you can see, they then create physical ripples. So suddenly we have this dialogue between the virtual and the physical. So this was more or less an ideal situation to discuss that. And it was quite successful. It's still running. We learned one thing for public space which was very interesting. So as you can see, it's a reactive installation. So people are walking over that and they activate something unintentionally. So compared to interactivity, where you have an intentional activation. And this creates a kind of identity because people, they are changing the space purely through their presence. So suddenly they become part of the public space. And sometimes it also goes then into interactivity because people start playing with this. Short tech explanation to it. So we used monochrome white LEDs. We used opaque glass with weight cells, so we could measure exactly where people are walking on. With this, we then created the virtual ripple, which then had been activating this kind of actuators, which then creates physical ripples. And this became a very interesting part then for us. So we said, okay, let's leave that one and go into this one. And the first purely physical work we did was an installation for the BMW Museum in Munich. They asked us to make an installation at the very entrance. And we came up with the idea or the proposal to say, let's do a kind of floating surface in space, which allows us to show the process of a car design. So if you have a floating surface in space, you can then show more or less any kind of surfaces. And because there are no flying carpets out there, we then started to make experiments. How can we have a hovering, floating space, shape in space? And we started with some kind of meshes or webs, and at the end we came up with spheres driven by motors. So we showed them this simulation, and then they came up and said, do you really want to show our nice car design with iron balls? And we said, yes, we want to do it. And we convinced them quite easily with doing a test setup. So we had 25 motors, as you can see, 25 spheres, which had been then driven by these motors. And we also learned a lot how to tell stories with this kind of three-dimensional physical display. But this is some kind of experience. Always do physical prototypes. This helps enormously, much more than doing some fancy visualizations. So I said we learned a lot about to tell the story, and because it was about telling the story of a car design, we picked 5 iconic cars of their history and more or less told the same story. At the very beginning, we had only white noise. There was no idea how the product or how the car will look like in the future. Then we had the very first abstract forms, which already points towards a certain car. Then we had competing forms. That's very usual in the design process. And at the very end, there was the car. In this case, a car from the 30s. So this is now a compilation of a 15-minute choreography. So it doesn't tell any story, but it shows you how the whole thing feels like. So if you do new things you never did before, you always have to take risks, as said before. And I only can say out of my experience, it's always worth taking risk, because if you take risk and if you do new things, then you're really developing yourself further. But as said, you do a lot of mistakes. This is one mistake I show you here, which I don't want to experience for a second time. So it was 4 weeks before the opening, and we had the whole installation in our studio set up. And after one cycle of choreography, there was a bug. So it was a flip of signs. Instead of going up, down, they get the instructions to go up. And the problem is that up there's a ceiling, and as you will see soon, it destroyed the installation in a millisecond. So we had been 6 people here. You hear no one. We had been so shocked because we had another 4 weeks, and with a lot of interns and helps from students, we then luckily could open the exhibition, and it was quite successful, became viral in the internet, and a lot of copies appeared. So suddenly the Chinese Science Museum in Beijing had this installation, the opening of the Shanghai exhibition, world exhibition, some other Chinese things. And so usually we don't copy ourselves, but we said, okay, we have to make a statement. And when we got a commission from the Singapore airport, where we have 50,000 people a day going through, we said yes. And we made a kind of similar installation with 1,200 copper drops in the entrance of Terminal 1. We had 2 installations, left and right, and this is a short impression about it. So no project without a disaster. We had been forced to make a security net under the whole installation because out of some kind of airport regulations, it had to be secured. And instead it became a kind of dangerous thing because at one day a lady was jumping over onto the security net and tried to steal one of the drops. It was really dangerous because this security net, was not meant to hold a person. It's at least 5 meters or 6 meters. So lucky enough, I can tell you she survived. But doing this in Singapore is not fun.
Everyone, please move back, please. Excuse me, everyone, please move back.
So, okay, she made it. First, I thought it's a kind of art performance, and I was in a way quite proud. But then I figured out that she has a kind of mental illness, and we actually really tried to find her address to send one of the drops, but couldn't succeed. Okay, next project out of this realm of physical installations driven by computational design and algorithms is a project for the Shanghai Expo 2010. We got a commission from a prosthesis producer, so someone who is doing all the prosthesis for legs and arms, and he wanted to donate an installation for the House of Disabled on this expo. So we came up with the idea of communicating with a mirror and sunlight over long distances. and asked the prosthesis producer to give us 100 of hand prostheses. We then painted them white, added a mirror to it, added a motor on the rear of every hand so the hands can move, and added a light, a very strong light source on the other side. So we have kind of moving reflections on the wall. And then we designed a computational choreography which always shows after 20 seconds the Chinese characters for movement and ability to move. So this is the test setup in Germany. And you can also already see how interesting these movements of prosthesis, things you usually don't want to see, can be. So then we had to set up in Shanghai, and you can see it's a very, let's say, fragile black and white installation because we thought it might be very interesting in a World Expo where you usually only have huge, large projections and LED screens to make something very poetic and very simple. So we are not responsible for the flowers, it's only the installation here. And you can see this computational choreography, which has this kind of behavior, swarm-like behavior, and which at the end always comes to these two Chinese characters. So we had around 100 of these choreographies. So this is how World Expo 2010 looked like. So it was all about large-scale projections, and we called it at the end a moment of retina massage. So you're walking around this expo and your retina got a very nice massage. So we purposely decided to do something more poetic and quiet and black and white, and it stood out and was not half as expensive as what you see here. So as you have seen, we made this way from the virtual, from the immaterial to the physical, choreographed, moved by computational algorithms. Since, let's say, 5-7 years, we are working now more with pure material, computationally designed. So we are using, or we are trying to create narrative surfaces where nothing is moving, and only through the movement of the visitors, the story is then told. So one project out of that is commissioned by the Deutsche Bank. They asked us to do an installation in front of their art collection and asked us to do it with their logo, which I personally like very much. And I knew Anton Stankowski who did it. He was one of my teachers, so it was a quite nice commission for me. What we did was a computationally designed mirror, a fragmented, faceted mirror, and a blue wall on the rear side. And if you are standing in the right point, you suddenly can read the logo. So it's nothing else than having a clever algorithm who is computing that surface and which then can be produced by new technologies, rapid prototyping, whatever. So here's the installation. You have the mirror, you have the blue light. You're coming into their headquarters, going up to their collection. You see the blue light, you see scattered triangles with no meaning, and as closer you come, suddenly the sign is legible from every side. So it's not the kind of kinetic movement anymore. It's the intelligent which is in the surface of the material. So the intelligent and design process is in forehand and is decoded and deciphered by the ones who is looking at it. And we did it in a very complicated way in Korea. Sorry. We had been commissioned by a museum on a river to do an installation dealing with the river. And I remembered when we got the commission, I remember the moment when I was sitting on a river and thinking, why can't this river not communicate with me with the reflections? I don't know what I smoked at that time, but I clearly remembered that moment. And I said, okay, let's create a surface, a river, which can communicate with us. So we designed a 40 square meter 3D milled silver-coated mirror, silver-coated river or piece of a river. And with a torch, you can decipher the waves. You can decipher the surface. So what we did, we it's a very complicated design, or let's say computational design process. So we encoded information in the surface, which could be then decoded with a torch. So that's the principle. So we have the surface, we have a torch, and if we are walking around, we then at one moment can read a sign in the reflections. The rest is only this kind of caustic reflections which you see on the water. So we did a little test setup. As always, it's 1 square meter of a lake. And in this 1 square meter, we encoded the Greek letter phi and the Greek letter delta. So phi for light and delta for movement. And as you can see, according to the position of the torch, you can then read the different kind of typography on the ceiling. So it worked, and then we were going into the content. We looked into different Korean poems dealing with river and found different attributes for river. So simply river is beautiful, or simply river is priceless. So everything we could find in a Korean poem, and computed the surface, encoded this information into the surface, 3D milled, silver-coated the surface, sent our waves to Korea, set them up, and people now can, on one hand, read these 2 letters, which means river is, and then they take one of the torches and look to the attributes. And then they find river is eternity or river is me. And we also have a sound with it, so it also helps people finding the right spot. So, as you can see, this was this kind of 3 phases we went through. We had this virtual area, we had this tangible area where we had moving, kinetic, choreographed installations, and now we are mainly working on these narrative surfaces, computationally designed surfaces. And 2 years ago, we had our 25th anniversary and had been invited to a gallery in Berlin. It's a very nice space. They usually commission 2 artists doing a project together. And I had been paired up with Olafur Arnalds, which is a very famous Icelandic composer. And I was thinking, what can I do with him? And then it came into my mind, we have a lot of these test setups, which I was speaking about, in our studio hanging, very sadly. So they are forgotten in one or the other corner. There's one of these test setups, and the idea was to bring them back to life. So the ones you already had seen for the Korean project, then this is a test setup for an installation we did for Zaha Hadid in Saudi Arabia. The test setup we had seen for BMW. Another kinetic test setup for a Deutsche Bank installation, and a prototype of a kinetic luminaire, which we did for a luminaire company in Berlin. So we renovated them, gave them another life, and then I was sitting together with the composer, and we did a 16-minute choreography, a kind of kinetic ballet, and This is a situation in the gallery. So we had some, I think 3 or 4 performances, and the rest was then as an exhibition.
I'm Ioachim Sautер. I'm a media artist.
You know this guy. So, but you already see even the test setup had been loaded with kind of technology, and it was a kind of very fragile situation to renovate all of them. And this is Olafur, the composer.
Based in Berlin, working on symphony kinetic. It's all about translating movement into sound, and also the other way around, that Joachim is translating my sound into movement. So it's been really interesting to write a dance piece for non-humans. The main conceptual idea about it is that each piece has its own characteristic and it has its own personality. So one piece is this piano line and another piece can be this string melody. And individually they work because they're both characters, but together they dance together and together they become the symphony.
What I'm really looking forward how people perceive that.
So you see, some of the installation had been driven by data I gave to Olafur, and other ones had been choreographed by getting his composition, and he was also playing live to one of these installations.
Actually, one of the most interesting things that I've experienced here is that this is just music for this space at this moment. And it's not meant to work anywhere else. And I'm not really sure it does work anywhere else. And it's both sad and beautiful in a way that it's only for this. And you know, it will disappear and never happen again. But in the end, it's all about these moments. You know?
So this goes for another 60 minutes. I think it gives an impression. This, as said, was a kind of birthday present which we gave ourselves for 25th anniversary. For 20th anniversary, we made a book, 256 pages, English or German, and there are some copies left, so feel free. And in the book, at the end of the book, we wrote down some kind of experience we made over this 20 years and how to more or less create a sustainable, innovative environment. And I want to go quickly through some of them. Ones which I have mentioned often now in my talk is have the courage to fail. So be brave, take risk. If you don't take risk, you always do the same things you always did. Very important, be ready to say no. Don't take every commission which is giving to you. Be selective and have then or create an identifiable attitude. One-liner, break rules only if you know them. It's very important to know the rules, but then you can break them. And if you are at one day, if you will be a boss and leading a team, then I only can advise you never motivate people. Because if you not motivate people, they do what they think you want to do them. But you want to have the best of them. And this is you only can create if you inspire them. So the other ones are also important. But for me personally, the most important thing is teaching. If you have at one moment of your career the possibility to teach, then please do it. Because teaching means that you have to be very precise in what you are doing. So you're reflecting yourself much better. And if you don't ask yourself the right questions, you can't answer the questions of the students or whomever you are teaching. So I have the big privilege to teach at the University of the Art since the early 90s. I have a studio class about new media art and new media design. And for tonight, I selected purposely projects from 10 years ago when we saw this transition from the immaterial to the physical. So they are old projects, but I think they show quite nicely this transition from the virtual to the physical. So one project is a very simple idea. This student, she used a bowl with water, very poetically, and if you are touching the bowl, your heartbeat is measured and stays in the water. So it's not on the heartbeat on the monitor, but it stays in the water. And you can carry the heartbeat of others around. So after a while it disappears, and but it stays in the water, so your heartbeat stays in the water. So very nice example for this translation from the immaterial to the physical. Another one was, actually the assignment had been object of desire. So the students had to create an object of desire, and the only thing they had to add was behavior. So the water was a behavior, and these students, they made a quite simple installation by only using by only using 3 cylinders with 3 joints, a little bit of capacity sensing, and a light sensor in the head, and a clever software behind. So suddenly these objects, which is nothing else than metal, very simple ones, became a kind of behavioral system. And people then started to interact with it. So one thing we learned here was that people, they really like to interact with behavioral systems because they seem to be autonomous. And it's totally different to pressing button on a touch screen. And they also learned that behavior creates a kind of emotional dialogue, and this is a kind of moment of security for this kind of installation. So we exhibited somewhere, you see it's so old projects, the resolution is so low. We exhibited in an installation in Britain somewhere, and it survived for 1 week. And it was mainly an exhibition where young people are coming, and this is an audience which very often try hard to destroy things. But because these nice things created a kind of behavioral, emotional attachment, it survived. So, and these are the ones who usually really like to destroy exhibits. But they had been very cautiously, oh, this guy, yeah. Okay, this goes on and on. A last project from a student, a second-year project from Julius von Bismarck. He made a very clever invention, which could have been already done 30 years ago. He used an old camera body. Some of you probably remember, this is the one where you have this film in, and he put a film with typography in it. So it was nothing else than an exposed film with typography, and he put a flash on the rear. So by flashing through the film and through the lens, you have for milliseconds a typography on the wall, which you can't read. And then he added a flash sensor to it. This is very usual in photo studios. If someone else is flashing, his flash is activating. What means if his apparatus is standing somewhere and someone else with a flash takes a picture, his apparatus is flashing for a millisecond typography onto the wall, and you have typography in your picture without knowing where it's coming from. So very clever thing. And he did it first at Checkpoint Charlie in Berlin. There we have the old signs, you are entering the American sector. There's also the Russian ones beneath it. And every tourist who took a picture of that sign had this sentence in it. 100 of people died last year by trying this at the US-Mexican border. So this is Julius. So you see his apparatus, this guy is flashing, the apparatus is also flashing, and suddenly there is something in the picture which no one knows where it's coming from.
Excuse me?
Yes.
You just took a picture of this sign?
Yeah, it's funny you ask because there's something on the sign that's in my picture, but it's not on the sign.
Can I see it maybe? It's spooky.
It's not possible actually.
Did you did this or what?
Voyage, voyage.
So he then, because this looks like a weapon, everyone was really staring at it, was a certain kind of insecurity in the area, but then he made this one which is not legible and made some very interesting experiments with it. When Obama was visiting Berlin, it was a kind of church-like situation, and he flashed a cross onto it. And a lot of press pictures had this cross on it. No one was asking, why does have Obama a cross on the thing? Yeah? And then he made a very risky thing. He went to during the Olympics, he went to Beijing and flashed Mao's stuff on Margret's stuff onto Mao's face.
Okay, wir machen es jetzt.
So he was holding his apparatus pointing towards the picture, and if someone took a picture around him with a flash, his flash was activated. So it worked. Okay, it's 9 o'clock. We as Germans, try to be precise. Yeah, actually it's 9 o'clock. So thank you for coming over and listening to me.
Дорогие друзья, если у вас есть вопросы к спикеру, вы можете их сейчас задать. Пожалуйста.
Алло, всем привет. Здравствуйте, очень понравилась ваша лекция. Хотел спросить, в каком городе вы родились, какой институт вы закончили и как дальше продвигалась ваша деятельность?
I never had this question. It's funny. Okay, it's very relevant what you're asking. So I'm coming from a very small town in the southern mountains of Germany. And in 1982, I was 33 years old. I went to Berlin. I moved to Berlin and experienced the pre-war time, or the wartime, and experienced then also the change of the city and the country. And then I figured out that I had been extremely influenced by Berlin, because Berlin always had been a city in process. It's the only city in the world who had 5 completely different political regimes last century. So we had the Prussian monarchy, we had the Weimar Republic, we had the Nazis, we had the communists, and then we had the reunification. And everyone tried to destroy the legacy of the former ones. So it's a very ugly city, but it's a city which is permanent in process. And this reflects quite nice new media. New media is a discipline of process, not only of results. So I'm quite influenced by that. I think I couldn't have done this staying in the southern mountains of Germany. Was this your question?
Да, спасибо. И в каком институте вы учились?
Okay. I made a lot of detours. I first studied, because I'm coming from an artist family, so you then don't want to be an artist at first, so I studied sports and philosophy. And at one moment in time, the voice of my blood more or less forced me to go to the university. Then I studied graphic design first, and then I was at the German Film Academy in Berlin. So my background is graphic design and film, because before '84 there was no personal computer, and when I graduated and had my first personal computer, I decided to stay into it and research this new technology in the realm of art and design. Was this the question? Okay.
И потом вы сразу занялись чем-то новым, каким-то поиском.
Okay, you want to know more about my private life? So I can tell you one thing. I'm a stupid professor. And today it's my son's first birthday. And I didn't have it in my calendar, so I agreed coming over. And sorry, now you ask me private questions, so you get private answers. So yesterday night, actually we planned a very nice breakfast for my son. I prepared everything, and let's say so 11 o'clock, someone from Stelka called me and said, your flight is cancelled. The only chance you have is if you fly very early in the morning. So this morning I missed the birthday of my son. Okay, what was the question again? I remember, okay, how everything started. Okay, I graduated in around the mid of the 90s, and this was the time when the first computer, the first Macintosh was on the market. And I was very lucky to get the very first one. And I already had the feeling that there is something with this machine, which is more than only a tool. So we used that machine at that time mainly as a tool to animate, to do desktop publishing, graphic design, and probably a little bit to do 3D graphics. But then we had the feeling that this is not only a tool, but it will be a medium. And we had been right, because in the early 90s with the internet, it was clear that it is the third big medium after print and broadcast. So this was the motivation. So I've more or less left everything behind me in terms of education and went into that technology, and this is what I do up to now.
Добрый вечер. Хотела поинтересоваться, сколько заняло время для исполнения инсталляции Deutsche Bank. И, естественно, вероятно, это относится к коммерческой тайне, но все-таки хотелось бы узнать диапазон подобных работ, ценовой диапазон. Сначала сколько времени заняла эмблема Deutsche Bank, инсталляция, и сколько это стоит? Спасибо.
Now it gets very personal. I'm open, so it's not a problem. Let's say usually you can't say how long you're working on a piece in general. By Deutsche Bank it was probably half a year, or let's say more than half a year. But the problem is not coming up with an idea and the process how to realize it. The problem is mainly the discussion with the ones who commissioned you. So this takes always a lot of time, especially if you are delivering something which they can't imagine. And I think the costs are between 50 and 100,000 euros. I can't remember precisely, but that's the price range.
Thank you for a very inspiring lecture, and I have a question about the installations. I really like the project of the student, this texting thing that projects into the pictures. And because it happens within a city environment and real life happens to it. So I'm really curious about your projects, the ArtCom projects that maybe possibly come into the city from the enclosed exhibition environment, and what happens to it?
So I showed at least one, the ones in Tokyo, and actually we don't get a lot of commissions in public spaces. There's some media facades, there's some installations, but let's say 90% is in the private collectors or museums or public, semi-public spaces. I would love to do it more in that direction, so therefore I use my students and I give them the assignment to do something in the city space. I think I do it every 5 years, and that's very, very motivating and challenging for them, because they have to go out. Usually they're sitting in the studio and they have to go out, think about how they can do things. And so the last assignment I did with them was memory of the cities. So they had to find a place in Berlin and create something which reminds onto disappeared moments of time or disappeared objects or buildings. And this was very, very interesting. And go to our website or go to my website. There's a link to the Artcom site and to the student site, and you can see the results of that. So I use my students to do that.
Спасибо большое за интересный рассказ. Очень приятно видеть вас здесь, в Москве. У меня вот такой вопрос. Ваши проекты очень физические, в них очень много работы с настоящими материалами. Но сейчас есть такой тренд противоположный, уход от физической реальности, проекции, и особенно виртуальная реальность. Вот как бы что вы про это думаете? Интересны ли вам эти технологии?
So as said, we did a lot of these virtual things here in the beginning, and we also did the very, very first virtual reality stuff in the early 90s, together with Jaron Lanier, who is one of the fathers of virtual reality. But I see exactly the opposite, as you said. So we have already had 3 decades of virtual, of immaterial, and now we have the desire to go to the physical world. For sure, there is a lot of virtual or immaterial things around there. And I have one comment to virtual reality. Actually, it's the 3rd time that virtual reality is named as the killer application. This was in the 60s, in the early 90s, and now we have it again. In southern Germany, where I'm coming from, we have a saying, it's difficult to translate, chasing the pig for a 3rd time through a city. So this is what we observe at the moment. Forget about virtual reality. It's not relevant. We have seen it. It's like 3D TV. You know, we had 10 years ago or 8 years ago, there was this big hype about 3D TV. No one is interested anymore. And you will see, believe me, probably I'm wrong, but I feel quite secure. In 3-4 years, no one is talking about virtual reality anymore. Billions of dollars had been burned again, like we had also seen many times. It's interesting, you can go once under these goggles and it's interesting for 10 minutes, but there's no content. There is no way to really tell a story. You can use it for games, okay, no doubt about that, but that's the end, that's it. So it will never be the killer application everyone predicts. Okay.
Как вы, вот кроме той работы, где у вас была выставка вместе с композитором, как вы подбираете музыку к вашим проектам? Это один вопрос. И второй вопрос. Ваши проекты, с одной стороны, выглядят совершенно как чистое искусство, а происходила ли когда-нибудь с ними дальнейшая судьба, коммерциализировались ли они как-то? Извлекалась из них какая-то добавочная стоимость, применялись ли они с какой-то практической выгодой? Спасибо.
Yeah. So, as you have seen, we got a lot of commissions also from big companies like Deutsche Bank or BMW. So it's a little bit, the projects are in this intersection between, let's say, museums art and commissioned art by companies. Not everything, but some of the projects you have seen. So again, the question how to commercialize that, we are very rigorous. We have a 20% artist fee of things we are doing, so 20% of the project is then staying with us, and this makes a good living or a living which is okay. And if there are copies out there, we only can be happy because you only are copied if you are doing relevant things. If you do irrelevant things, no one is copying you. So we can survive, and we have now nearly 30 years. I'm quite sure that we make it the next 2 years to the 30th anniversary, and I'm quite confident. So, okay. So the microphone ended the evening.
Включился. Музыка в ваших проектах, как вы находите, подбираете музыку?
So the last project I showed, this was a curatorial decision by the gallery. So I always listened to the music of Olaf Arnalds, but I didn't come up with the idea. So the curator came up with the idea and said, okay, go together. The first project I showed was the opera. This was obviously by a composer. And actually now, being very in the moment, I do an installation again in Singapore. And because I had so good experience with Olaf Arnalds, I asked him and invited him to do this with me together. So actually there are no parameters. It's more out of the situation, out of the project and out of the idea.
Спасибо за прекрасную лекцию. Хотелось бы узнать, сколько по времени вы работали графическим дизайнером, если вы им работали, почему вы перестали заниматься дизайном, и считаете ли вы, что художник должен выбрать одну какую-то область и в ней существовать? Спасибо.
Okay. A lot of questions. So I worked as a graphic designer. But as said, as soon as this machine was on my table, I stopped doing it. And it was, as said, so interesting going with it and trying to find out what is behind this technology and how can it be used in communication, that I more or less forgot about graphic design. Nevertheless, all of the projects you have seen, there is a moment where I learned a lot from typography. So typography was a very important teacher to me, what means precision, legibility, etc. So I took a lot of experience from the graphic design education into my work. Now talking about if an artist has to look for a niche, it's difficult. So there are a lot of interesting artists who work totally different. So starting with paintings, going into video art and whatever, and they have their attitude and their style in a way, so they are legible. And the other ones, they are in a very certain field, only doing 30 by 30 centimeter pictures. So there's no recipe. It's all about your attitude towards what you are doing and the risk you are taking doing it. So I don't know, someone said someday, an artist is the sum of his risks. So it's about taking risk and not about the niche.
Добрый вечер. Огромное спасибо, что приехали к нам. И я думаю, все меня поддержат. Передайте, пожалуйста, привет и с днем рождения, поздравления вашему сыну. А у меня вот какой вопрос. С того момента, как вы приехали в Берлин из маленького городка в Южных горах, вы все время говорите «мы». Мы создавали, мы исследовали, мы изучали, мы делали. Вы говорите о команде. Как она родилась? Кто эти люди? Как они прогрессируют вместе с вами?
Yes, so I'm not a single person, a single artist or single signature designer. I think in the whole realm of let's say, technology-driven art, we see a lot of this kind of groups coming up, and this makes it very difficult for the traditional art market because they are only collecting or mainly collecting single names. But on the other hand, it's a fantastic work situation. So I don't have to stand up alone in the morning as my sister. She is an artist. She's a painter. She goes to the atelier and is painting the whole day pictures. I'm not that character. So I'm very happy having this dialogue with others, especially with others who take also the risk to leave their field and to create a new field with others. So we all left our field. I left my field of graphic design and film. My partners, they left their programming environments, and we started 30 years ago creating a new kind of discipline. And this is very, very satisfying. So I'm happy to be born at that moment, you know, to be capable to do that. It's your applause.
Yeah. Hello. Hello. Thank you very much for your lecture. I just wanted to ask, every artist has a dream, and you're an artist and you probably have a dream. What's your dream and how do you see the future of computers?
My dream, being capable to work for the next at least 20, 30 years. So I'm end of 50, so I want to work, hopefully I can work until 80 at least and be relevant. This is my dream. The future of computer is already now. So the computer is everywhere. It's in objects, it's everywhere, and it's in a way a quite of interesting driving moment. So especially for artists and for poetry in general. So we all have these machines. We have every information at every moment in time on our fingertips. So what happens is that a lot of people, they are bored getting information immediately and very precisely. So what they are looking for now in the meantime is a moment of poetry. And poetry means to decipher information like in a poem. So you have to read it very carefully, and you are then very deep into the content. And this is something we also see a renaissance of the poetry at the moment. And I think this is something very wonderful, which is more or less a reaction onto all this technology. And very important, and this is the difficulty, not everyone can write a poem. Because to be open to decipher something, to decipher a metaphor in a poem, you have to create beauty, for instance. And if you don't create that, no one want to go into your poem.
Спасибо большое за лекцию. И в особенности я хочу поблагодарить Иоахима за то, что он принял приглашение и приехал действительно в день рождения своего сына. Еще раз спасибо большое. Мне очень приятно, что на самом деле так много вопросов от зрителей. Это значит, что темы, которые были рассказаны на лекции, действительно волнуют и российскую аудиторию, и нас всех. И у меня такой достаточно, вероятно, очевидный вопрос, который исходит из темы лекции, и он несколько раз поднимался в вопросах предыдущих посетителей, зрителей. Вопрос следующий. Вы показали как бы некий путь, который прошла ваша студия, и который созвучно с общими мировыми трендами от цифрового дизайна, от компьютерных алгоритмов в эпоху материального физического дизайна, в эпоху физических кинетических инсталляций. Какая может быть следующая эпоха в вашем видении? Как в рамках работы вашей студии, так и, может быть, в каких-то общеглобальных трендах? Да, мы затрагивали тему виртуальной реальности. Понятно, что, вероятно, это как бы прошедший для вас этап. Тогда что вы видите следующей эпохой вот в рамках вот этого пути?
So if I would know, I would tell you, but I don't know. So let's say the process how I try to develop things further is by doing. So I can't speculate. I speculate through my work, and I showed you more or less the latest work, and I can't look beyond that. So it's physical now, so get physical.
Well, I have a lot of questions, but I will ask only one about installation, which in your opinion can symbolize Moscow or Russia.
Ooh.
Thank you.
Okay. Oh, but so I have to design now ad hoc an installation for Moscow. Ask me, give me a commission. No, you don't have to give me a commission. Ask me in a week or so. Probably I can. After my flight, I have to digest my experience here, and I can't say it now. Sorry.
Hello. What kind of software and programming languages did you use to manage sphere choreography? And could you tell more about programming part of sphere choreography?
So the question should be, which software don't you use? So we use a lot of software for that. And over the years, we changed the software. So we have, on one hand, we have an in-house system, which is C++, and the whole range from very complex languages like C++ down to processing. So a lot of the choreography of the BMW project is done by processing. So it's a very simple sketch. So we do black and white animation with processing, and then we are using the color value for the height. So it means what means a white pixel is a sphere which is very low, and a black pixel is very high. So with this black and white animations, we can choreograph, for instance, this kind of installation. Okay, a non-technical question for the end.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hello? Yeah. Hello. First of all, thank you for very interesting story of your life, because I know it's real, it's life, and you can't imagine it's like the business, and you're living by this. Yeah. But I have for the last question, I have a very simple, but I think it's a very curious question for some people that's sitting here. What kind of software do you use on your Mac during this timeline?
Ah, okay.
Yes, it's very, very interesting question.
But that's super simple, you know. If you have a new folder and you have a picture.
Yeah, there is no
okay.
information on the screen.
So if you have a new folder and you make Apple J, then you see that you can put a picture in your folder in the background. So you put it there, and then you have a picture here. So that's simple. And I only did a... Yeah, this is my son after he was born. Sorry. And then, so as a background, you have then a picture, and then in this case, it's then the timeline. So it's nothing else than using the desktop to make a timeline, and then there are only aliases here on the desktop. So very simple.
Yeah, it's very simple. Simple. The simple is beauty, as all of your works. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. Thanks.